Hi, this is an extra credit project for HD 1170 by Jacqueline Chen. The mental health and emotional instability of Asians and Asian Americans, age 18 to 24. It has been noted that Asians have one of the lowest mental health statistics in the U.S. Asian American females age 18 to 24 actually have one of the highest risks of falling to depression and attempting suicide. Interestingly, within Cornell, the category of students with the highest risk of depression is Asian males in engineering. While Asians make up only 17% of undergrad enrollment, Gannett data indicates that Asian students make up a disproportionately high 35% of psychiatric hospitalization and 25% of medical leave of absence. This group is also more likely to report feeling hopeless, 44% versus 36% of the general public. Even though Asians make up 4.8% of the population, compared to 72.4% of whites in 2010 nationally, the overall suicide rate for Asian Americans is half that of the white population. It was also discovered that serious psychological distress increased with lower levels of income. This increased to an even larger extent as one could imagine that many third world countries in Asia may have an even larger proportion of adolescents with mental health issues and emotional instability. For example, while China is known to have a large financial net worth, many populations of people are incredibly poor. So while this issue is universal, the issue of emotional and mental instability is even more prevalent in emerging adolescents aged 18 to 24. These are our college years where we transition from learning in a classroom setting to learning about life from real experiences of going into the job markets or taking risks for the first time. This brings up the question, why are Asians at a higher risk as compared to other cultures? First, they are less likely to seek help for emotional and mental health problems than whites, from the National Latino and Asian American Study in 2002. Asian immigrants are not completely aware of resources, and with the language barrier, it is harder for them to communicate. In Cornell, roughly 1 in 5 students identify as Asian or Asian Americans. Despite this, roughly 10% of faculty at Cornell are Asian, making it difficult for students to find a guidance counselor who can relate. Furthermore, a lot of domestic interpersonal violence is kept quiet in the Asian community and considered simply as, quote-unquote, private family issues. Second is self-perceived social status. For Asians, it isn't just objective social status, but their perception of their social status in society. Those who see it as low have higher rates of disorders, says David Takuchi, principal investigator for NLWAS. This ties into general disrespect of the individual that may be linked to racism and would ultimately lead to lower self-esteem and higher rates of depression. In a recent study, it was discovered that 74% of Asian American NLWAS participants said they had experienced some kind of unfair treatment, and that 63% attributed such instances to racial factors. Third is familial expectations. Emerging adolescents may not reach expectations and choose to pursue a new way of thinking aligned with a more lax American culture. This leads to increased familial disputes widened by a generation and culture gap. Mental health plays into a role. This may possibly lead to verbal, mental, or even physical abuse. Kung Fu is in our genetics. Personally, growing up with my mother, who was a black belt in Taekwondo, I was quite an obedient child. Anyways, in regards to Cornell, many Asians consider Cornell as a second-place Ivy because of stats that make Cornell seem like an easy Ivy to get into. Thus, it plays into their own expectations to have to do excessively well as compared to their peers, an occurrence that is not always the case. For these several reasons, the shame and stigma associated with mental health leads to Asians not utilizing their resources. The lack of awareness and action inevitably leads to problems that may be exacerbated as a result of delayed assistance, which only propagates a continued cycle of unawareness and lack of treatment. Currently, the cycle persists. In recent years, there have been more studies and organizations that promote mental health awareness. In Cornell's very own campus, we have AAAF, Asian and Asian American Forums. Some interesting Cornell stats to note. In Cornell's 2011 Pulse survey, international students and Asian students were most likely to report having considered suicide at least once, with 1% of the Asian student population actually attempting to commit suicide. Fortunately, the percentages of Asians who reported that they were unable to function academically have declined since 2005. In 2009, a journal article called Model Minority at Risk publicated the study of first and second Asian American young adults who indicated sources of mental health stress from pressure to meet parental expectations of high academic achievement, having to live up to the model minority stereotype, balancing two cultures and language, familial obligations, and discrimination due to racial cultural background. This led to Asian Americans using personal support networks like friends and religious community rather than seeking professional help. Similarly, CAPES, the Chinese American Psychiatric Epidemiology study, found that language-based discrimination led to higher levels of seeking help from informal services. Moreover, negative feelings towards professional mental health services generally led to higher levels of informal services. Also, those who had medical insurance were more likely to utilize professional mental health care than those without. Some limitations of these studies include the lack of a diverse sample population. Because the Asian demographic is rapidly changing, this heterogeneity makes it difficult for researchers to have a comprehensive study based on various Asian nationalities. The way factors such as stress, acculturation, and barriers interrelate should also be further analyzed, as well as causal relationships between dependent variables in studies. And thus a gap persists as to what else needs to be done to decrease the stats of Asian Americans who have low mental health. Of course, this leads to the question of what else we can do as a collaborative and open society to encourage more Asians and other ethnic groups to utilize more professional mental health resources. The academic bureaucracy should implement a stronger, more culturally aware network of counseling for those in need. Students should continue to be actively engaged in spreading the awareness of Asian mental health so that mental health issues can be diagnosed early or even prevented from becoming exacerbated. Lastly, researchers should continue to find ways to improve sample population and have comprehensive studies. It would be a good idea to explore differences in factors such as immigration status, birthplace, and age in relation to the prevalence of mental health disorders, chances of seeking treatment, effectiveness of receiving treatments. Until then, student organizations on campus should continue to branch out in raising mental health awareness. Sometimes it helps to let people know that mental health is a very important issue and that there are people out there who are willing to give you a hand. Maybe you might even be able to help someone else out as well. It's definitely well worth giving a try and taking a stance in promoting this issue. After all, we as emerging adolescents are the future generation. Together we stand, together we achieve, and together we can be happy. Thanks for watching.